Welcome back everyone. Time to talk about another Android phone that in my opinion was one of the coolest phones that came out last year. It didn't bring the craziest things to the table, but it brought one feature, actually two, that I really did like at that time, and I think even now a lot of phone manufacturers are still not putting it into their phones, and I really wish they did, but I'll get into more of that in a second. But when this phone came out last year, I believe it was around that $800 price tag. It was the, most flagshipy device that the OnePlus manufacturer was making over a year ago and around that May timeframe. And you can pick it up right now for around $500 on Amazon. I don't know what price it exactly is, but I'll go ahead and leave a link down below. You can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now on the front of the OnePlus 7 Pro, we have that beautiful 6.67-inch fluid AMOLED display. It's a 1440p panel, and what I can tell you is this panel is still holding up very, very well. I think the fact that it's a humongous panel, this is a ginormous phone, but also the curved sides of the whole entire side of the phone really does add a lot more character to the device. And holding it in the hand, it doesn't really feel like a crazy big phone, even though it really is. It feels smaller than what it is. It's still a ginormous phone. I have a hard time using it if I were to use it as a main device, but I still find it really, really impressive that OnePlus was able to make this type of display with no notch for the most part, no bottom bezel, very, very small bottom bezel. But the biggest thing was, I think, would be that pop-up camera. They didn't have a hole punch display on it, or a bezel with the camera or with a bezel with the camera inside of it. They literally had a pop-up camera on this thing. Now, for better or for worse, it was different, and I think a lot of people kind of appreciated that type of design. Now, me personally, I wasn't too fond of it, and obviously OnePlus wasn't either. They eventually switched it off with the OnePlus 8 and the whole entire 8T series as well, but I still found it pretty cool that OnePlus was able to do something like this and take a pretty big jump. I found that really cool. I don't think they were the first manufacturers to do that, but at a humongous scale like this, I find it pretty impressive in my opinion. Now, we also had that 90Hz refresh rate, which I think is probably even bigger than the pop-up camera, to be honest, because this wasn't the first phone to bring 120Hz or 90Hz or anything like that, but it was a pretty big, it was my first phone that I had with the 90Hz refresh rate. And I can definitely tell you it was a really good thing about this phone. I really did like it a lot about it. Again, it wasn't perfect. I definitely do think the Galaxy S10 had a better looking display than the OnePlus 7 Pro, but I still think with that 90Hz refresh rate, it made it that much better of a device, especially at that price tag, which was very, very impressive. Now on the bottom of the OnePlus 7 Pro, we have that USB Type-C port, which is cool. And on the back, we have that standard glass back, which I'm actually a fan of. I like these glass backs too, but I kind of do prefer the frosted glass back that we now have on like the OnePlus 8s and the iPhone 12 Pros and those type of phones. But I think this one is still pretty good for the most part, and I really don't think anybody's really complaining about it, to be completely honest. Now, you do have that triple camera setup on the back of the OnePlus 7 Pro. You have a 48 megapixel wide angle lens, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, then a 16 megapixel ultra wide sensor. And for the most part, it's actually a decent camera. I don't think it was the best at that time, and it still isn't amazing, but for a majority of people out there, it'll pretty much be able to get the job done. I think the biggest advantage that this phone has, as I've said before, with my 3 camera rule, it has that wide angle lens, it has that telephoto lens, and it has that ultra wide sensor. So the quality, is going to be a little hit or miss because it doesn't have the best software enhancements in my opinion, but really you do have the hardware that's really, really good. And if you know a little bit about, color grading and changing, the filtering of photos, you can actually get pretty decent photos from this thing for sure. It's not the best camera, but it really doesn't do that bad. You have the ability of shooting 4K at 60 as well on this phone, so that's another pretty big advantage. Again, it's not going to be the best camera, but for a majority of people out there, I think it'll definitely get the job done. But that front camera is the one area that I really wish they spent a little bit more time on. It is that pop-up camera. It's a 16 megapixel lens, and if it had the ability of doing 4K in any form, that would have been way better, but you can only do 1080p at 30 on that front camera, and they pretty much kept it the same for so many generations after. It makes no sense why they do that. It's like they hit on the back camera so much, but I feel like more people use that front camera more and more each year, so that's kind of a big thing to keep in mind in my opinion. But that pop-up camera is a novelty, but the actual quality of that camera lens isn't really that great if I'm being completely honest. But in terms of the camera, that really pretty much covers it up. Now in terms of the performance, actually before I get to the performance of software, this is probably one of the best assets of this phone. It's running Oxygen OS, and up until I think the Android 11 betas came out, it was probably my favorite version of Android, but now it's looking like they're starting to skin it a little bit more, and I'm not really a huge fan of that, to be completely honest. I really hope they don't go down that road. I hope this is temporary, and I hope with like Oxygen OS 11.5 or whatever the next version they're going to come out with, I hope it is a little bit of a cleaner version of Android more than what it is with Android 11. With Oxygen OS 11, they kind of took a step backwards, taking, cues from like One UI and stuff, and I'm not really a fan of that. So I hope they don't do it, but they kind of already did, so I guess we'll see what happens. But in terms of software, this phone, I think is probably going to get like another version or two of Android, which is really good. I mean, this thing just came out last year. Even though we have like two more generations of phone after this, actually technically three, because we have the 7T series, we have the 8, and now we have the 8T series. So this thing is like 3 generations behind, but it's still going to be lasting for many, many more years, and it still has custom ROM support and all that. So this phone is not going anywhere anytime soon, which is a really, really good thing. So in terms of software, that pretty much covers it up. Now we get to hit on the performance right now. This thing has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 chipset, an octa-core CPU, and 3 different models. So this thing had the base 6GB model, had that mid-tier 8GB model, then it had that top-tier 12GB model. And what I can definitely tell you is the performance side of this phone is really enhanced by the software, because it doesn't have a lot of moving pieces all over the place. And with that 90Hz refresh rate and with the smoothness of this phone, it really just made it such a smooth experience. And even now when I go and pick it up and do things with it, I feel like it's just such a smoother device than what it really should be, in my opinion. Now, it definitely isn't the fastest when I've compared it to the OnePlus 8, the OnePlus 7 Pro, the OnePlus 8T, and what I can definitely tell you was even there, it held up for sure. It definitely wasn't faster, but it was smooth. It was just a little bit slower here and there, and it's still, even into the later part of 2020, it's still a very fast phone for the most part. I feel like for really anything you're going to do with it, it's going to be able to handle those tasks. Now, is it going to be the best performing phone? Is it going to be able to, rival a Galaxy S20 or, the Galaxy S21 or OnePlus 8T? No, yes and no. I would say if you're not comparing them side by side, you probably wouldn't be able to notice those many differences. Really, anything I ever did with the 7 Pro, it was able to do it just fine. Heavy intensive games, comparisons, when I was, booting up games from one this app to the other, like, it was totally fine in my opinion. Obviously, it wasn't perfect. It still has a lot of, hiccups here and there. But I think if you're just the average user, you're going to be perfectly fine with something like a OnePlus 7 Pro, in my opinion. So in terms of performance, I'll definitely say it gets a thumbs up. Definitely not perfect and definitely not the best. But whenever I compared it to any of my other phones, especially the 2020 lineup of phones, it was really a decent experience for sure. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now, probably the other really good area about this phone was the battery life. This thing has that 4,000 mAh battery inside of it. Now, the battery life itself is actually pretty impressive, but the fact that this thing doesn't have wireless charging is pretty insane. That is like a given nowadays, and more and more wireless chargers with way more capability are coming out, and the fact that this phone doesn't support that is very, very weird. I never understand why OnePlus does this. I guess it's whatever, even the OnePlus 8 doesn't have it, but I guess this phone, by not having it, doesn't really affect it too much in the battery life, but the feature itself is a battery feature, and I really wish this phone supported it. So in terms of battery life, it's good, but it doesn't have wireless charging. Now, to kind of finish off this video and to answer the question, how does the OnePlus 7 Pro still hold up in late 2020, and if it's still worth it? Well, what I can tell you is that for sure, this phone has a lot of pros and it has a few cons that kind of make it a little bit of an interesting device. So the pros, this phone is a beautiful device. You can pick it up and you can feel like you have one of the best premium devices still, because it still is a super premium device. How much better can you make a phone feel than glass on the front, glass on the back, and pretty much no bezel on it? Like, it's very hard to come from this device and feel like you have, a way worse device than any other one. In some ways, this phone kind of looks better than the OnePlus 8 or OnePlus 8 Pro because of the lack of camera hole. So that was a really big feature. You have that 90Hz refresh rate, and it's much, much cheaper than the newer latest offerings from a lot of other manufacturers. It's a huge phone. You have a lot of different options when it comes down to the RAM. So you can either choose the lowest RAM, which is still pretty decent, all the way up to 12 gigs of RAM in this phone, which is actually really, really good. You have that inbuilt fingerprint sensor in the display as well. The software is one of its biggest assets. Even if Android 11 has a little bit of a skin over it for Oxygen OS 11, it still is better than One UI 2, I think. So that's one way to look at it. But there are a few cons, and they're usually mostly in the hardware. The front camera really isn't that great. I wish they really spent more time, even this generation to the OnePlus 8. I wish they did focus more on, upgrading that camera. I feel like that would have been really cool. There's no wireless charging on this device, which is really weird. I don't know why they would do something like that. That's just like a very basic feature, and the fact that they didn't put it into a phone that just came out last year is very, very weird to me. And the last thing, the durability of this phone, there's no IP certification on this thing, which is very weird as well. There's not a lot of OnePlus devices that have IP certification, so they have to save money one way or another, but that's another way to look at it. And if I had to use this phone, I would 100% use it and be okay with it. I think this phone is perfectly fine. I can probably get away with, the wireless charging and the IP certification. The front camera would be the one area where I would probably get a little bit upset about, because I use my front camera a lot. So that is one way to look at it. But I think for a majority of people getting this phone, I would say go for it, dude. This is like a no-brainer. This is a very, very good phone. And for around $500, I would say, it doesn't really get that much better than this, if I'm being honest. So in terms of everything, that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.